We're tackling chapter 10 today. This is the 10th week. We're tackling chapter 10. The chapter 10 is about emotions. So let's go ahead and get started. Emotions. Ekman, Sorensen, and Friesen in 1969 proposed that there is a set of basic emotions that are universally recognized around the world, and we're going to go over the universal emotions right now. As you can see, this young lady is happy, and this young man is not. That's anger. That's happy. That's sad. That's frightened. That's surprised. And that's disgusted. Those are the six universal emotions that people display: disgusted, surprised, frightened, sad, happy, and angry. Okay. Now, this is one that may or may not be universal. It is contempt. Another one that may or may not be universal: shame. Another one: embarrassment. Interest. She's interested in whoever she's looking at. And this one is pride. Though happiness has many different words, the expression for happiness does not vary globally. When shown posed facial expressions, each culture is best at identifying expressions from their own culture. Meta-analysis of cross-cultural studies on facial expressions, people were about 9% more accurate at identifying people from their own culture. So if it's somebody from your culture, then you're more likely to be able to identify what the emotion that they're displaying. Adams and colleagues in 2010 had participants guess what emotions were being displayed by just showing them pictures of eyes. The participants were better at identifying the emotions of people from their own culture than they were from people from other cultures. They also noted that they showed more activity in their amygdala when they were shown eyes from people from their own culture who were demonstrating fear. This is a picture of Michelle Janicki. She is a hurdler, obviously for Australia. The differences in facial expressions of emotions across cultures are distinct enough that people can reliably guess the nationality of targets who are expressing emotions, even though the targets are of fairly similar cultural backgrounds. An American can guess better than chance whether a target is from the United States or Australia. And I just showed you a picture of Michelle Janicki. You can see that she's Australian. You would never get her mixed up with an American, or actually you probably wouldn't. I'm going to show you four pictures of individuals now. One of the individuals is from Sholo, Arizona. One is from Australia, and the other two are from Wisconsin. And I want you to identify where the individuals are from, or see if you can identify where the individuals are from. There's four pictures, two on the first page, and two on the second page. They all play soccer for Viterbo, which is a college in Wisconsin. Let me show you the other two. And the last two. Now, if you can tell me where everybody is from. One is from Australia, one is from Sholo, and the other two are from Wisconsin. As curious as that is. If you guessed that this one is from Australia, you'd be wrong. She is from Wisconsin, and this is the Australian, And this is another girl from Wisconsin. And this is the individual from Sholo. So if you guessed this one was from Sholo and that this one was from Wisconsin, and this one's from Australia, and this one is from Wisconsin, you would be correct. The same researchers did a study earlier comparing Japanese participants with Japanese Americans. Results were similar to those for the Americans and the Australians. When the faces showed emotions, they were easier to read. Neutral faces were much harder to read. Anger and happy, this one is more neutral. Baron Cohen et al. In 2001 and Krauss et al. In 2010 found that people of lower socioeconomic background were more accurately able to identify facial expressions of emotions. The lower the status, the more the individuals must attend to facial expressions. Therefore, they're better able to read people's emotions, which may be one of the reasons why wealthy people are so bad at identifying what people are thinking. Different cultures will attend to different parts of the face to read expressions. The Japanese find emotions socially disruptive and thus are more likely to try to display a neutral face than Americans. But it is hard to control the muscles around the eyes, so the Japanese focus on the eyes to determine emotion. Research by Yuki et al. In 2007 attempted to determine where Japanese and American focus was trying to read facial expressions. The Japanese read facial expressions from the eyes. Americans read facial expressions from the mouths. European Americans are more likely to try to read the whole face than the Japanese, and are more likely to include mouths prominently in their cartoon art. Japanese cartoon art shows dominant eyes and sometimes no mouths at all, as in anime. As you can see, this is an American cartoon. This is two Japanese cartoons. As you can see, the mouths are barely there at all. King of the Hill, the mouths are very prominent. What's going on with the King of the Hill? There's the Simpsons with their big mouths. Hello Kitty, of course, has no mouth at all. Here are some more Japanese cartoons. Big eyes, hardly any mouths whatsoever. American Dad, big mouths once again. And there's a Japanese cartoon where these two kids are saying something. This one is saying something as well. This one's not. As you can see, the mouth is gone. The mouths aren't giving you any hint as to what is going on with those individuals. While researchers argue that all cultures have a similar capacity to read facial expressions, cultures tend to maintain varying display rules for facial expressions. Display rules are culturally specific rules that govern which facial expressions are appropriate in a given situation and how intensely they should be exhibited. Some cultures encourage people to display their emotions in clear, if not exaggerated form. In certain Arab populations, it is dishonorable if a man does not respond to an insult with a great demonstration of anger. And of course, we have had problems with that in the past. The problems that we have had is that sometimes saber rattling is just that, saber rattling. They're not planning on pulling the saber. They just need to show anger so that they don't lose face with their culture. The Kululi of New Guinea tend to show their emotions particularly intensely and dramatically, and that's according to Schieffelin in 1979. Among the Alaskan Native Utku, public expressions of anger are strongly condemned, and that's according to Briggs in 1970. I'm going to show you another picture of an Utku female in just a moment. The Balinese have reference for emotional smoothness, where the emphasis is on the avoiding strong displays of emotional feelings for both positive and negative emotions. When Americans are embarrassed, they tend to make a facial expression where their face turns red, they close their eyes, and they look down, and that has to do with embarrassment. In India, when someone is embarrassed, they literally bite their tongues, an expression that is not recognized by people in the United States. Voluntarily produced facial expressions like a wink and a false smile suggest the existence of cultural display rules that lead people to express idiosyncratic facial expressions known as ritualized displays. And this, of course, is Justin Bieber. This is him actually smiling, and this is him with a fake smile. This is an individual with a real smile. As you can see, his eyes are all crinkled, and here he is with a fake smile. So if you were Japanese and you were looking at Justin Bieber, you would know that he's really smiling, he's really happy here. And if you're looking at this individual, because you would see the crinkly eyes, you would know that he was really happy, and you would know that he, maybe is, maybe isn't, both of them. The facial feedback hypothesis states that the expressions on our face reflects our true feelings. Strack et al. In 1980 sought to prove the hypothesis by forcing the face to form a frown or smile by holding a pencil in their mouths while watching a comedy. The researchers discovered that those in the smile mode found the humor in the comedy funnier. And I did this experiment when I was at Ashford, where I took a classroom full of individuals, and half of them were holding a pencil like this, and half of them were holding a pencil like this. And I showed them a cartoon, and at certain junctures during the cartoon, I had them write down whether something was funny or not. And I got exactly the same result that Strack did. Strack is actually a German, and this experiment was initially done in Germany. Matsumoto et al. In 1988 asked American and Japanese participants about an experience where they expressed select emotions. The Americans reported feeling those emotions longer and more intensely because it is expected in the United States that we are emotional. In Japan, you're supposed to have neutral emotions, and therefore they would be less likely to express emotions. Neskida and Karasawa in 2002 had Japanese and American students complete questionnaires indicating the emotions they were experiencing a number of times during the day. The Japanese were 3 times more likely to indicate that they had no emotions than Americans did. McCallums et al. In 2012 and Ryder et al. In 2008 found that East Asians are less attentive to their visceral states when compared with Westerners. Zerkoto in 2010 found that Ghanaians attend to their emotions less than Americans do. There's a surprise for you. From these studies, researchers have hypothesized that masking emotions in East Asia might be leading East Asians to experience fewer and less intense emotions than Americans. Research in the West has indicated that people with hostile tendencies are at increased risk for cardiovascular disease. The reason hostility leads to cardiovascular disease is that hostile people have more occasions when they need to inhibit their anger. In other words, instead of being angry, they hold it in. And instead of displaying their anger, they hold it in and don't show how angry they actually are. However, in cultures where the anger is not expressed, people tend to experience anger less intensely. This hypothesis was tested looking at European and Chinese Canadians. Given potentially anger-inducing scenarios, the Chinese Canadians found that scenarios less anger-inducing than did the European Canadians. Now, why is this important, and why in the world are there Chinese Canadians? And the answer is when Hong Kong closed, when England pulled out of Hong Kong, a lot of the Chinese who were living in Hong Kong moved to the west coast of the United States and the west coast of China. So there was in 2000, there was a large influx of Chinese immigrants to Canada and Washington and Oregon. More of them went to Canada because Canada, of course, is part of the British Commonwealth, and they felt uh, more at home with the Canadians than they did with the Americans. So there's a relatively large percentage of Chinese American or Chinese Canadians in Canada. The most common reaction to European Canadians from the anger-provoking scenarios was to openly express their anger. There you go. I'm really not happy about this. That's a Canadian yelling for you. For Chinese Canadians, their most common response was to reappraise the situation in a less angry way, or to make efforts to distract themselves from the anger-provoking event, just not thinking about it. The European Canadians felt much anger and tried to express it openly. The Chinese Canadians adopted strategies to minimize their anger response and thus felt less angry. Anderson and Lennon in 2006 measured the blood pressures of their Canadian participants. Both Chinese Canadian and a European Canadian blood pressure slowly returned to baseline levels. Chinese Canadian blood pressure returned to normal faster than a European Canadian blood pressure. Chinese Canadians experienced their anger less intensely than European Canadians and were more comfortable with strategies that served to reduce their experience of anger, whereas the European Canadians suffered from physiological consequences if they did not openly express their anger. Okay. Compared with Americans, negative emotions in East Asians are associated with fewer negative health outcomes and less of a neural response when suppressing their emotions, indicating that it is not as effortful for them to suppress negative emotions as Americans. The English language has 2,000 different emotion words. English speakers are cued by their language to express their emotions, and this may be one of the reasons why the English-speaking world expresses their emotions so readily. The Chawang of Malaysia have only 8 words that describe emotion, and only 3 represents Ekman's basic emotions, anger, and fear. Uganda, speakers from Uganda do not make a distinction between sorrow and anger. The Gidjingali Aborigines of Australia use one word, guru kaj, to express both shame and fear. Samoans use one word, alofa, to express both love and pity. The Utku of Alaska do not distinguish between feelings of kindness and gratitude, and we see the same tattoo markings on this individual that we saw before. The tattoo markings below her lip anyway. The Ifaluk in Micronesia do not even have a word for emotion, instead lumping all internal states together. Despite the fact that English is a Germanic language, there is no equivalent word in English for the German word Schadenfreude, feelings of pleasure that one gets when witnessing the hard times of someone else. Schadenfreude. The Javanese have a term, iklas, which refers to somewhat pleasant feelings caused by frustration. The Japanese ame captures the relatively pleasant feelings that one experiences when allowed to emphasize his or her dependence on one another. It often involves the tendencies to behave inappropriately toward a close other as a gesture to demonstrate how secure the relationship is. In other words, you take advantage of them. And that's what's happening in this picture. She's climbing on him. here, and here. Uchida et al. In 2009 compared the emotional responses from athletes after an Olympic victory. Comparing Japanese and U.S. statements, the researchers determined that the Japanese feel especially good when they're focusing on how their emotional experiences lead them to connect with others. Americans feel especially good when they're dwelling on those emotional experiences that distinguish them from others. In other words, the Japanese want to have the same experience, the same emotions that everybody has, and the Americans want to show a difference between themselves and everyone else. In 2013, Oishi and colleagues examined dictionaries of the definition of happiness in 30 countries. They found that luck was included in the definition in all but the United States, Spain, Argentina, Ecuador, India, and Kenya. And the reason I'm showing you this picture is because this is the symbol of good luck in East Asia. It's a cat waving at you. You'll see these in Chinese restaurants or Japanese restaurants. It just means good luck. People who live in countries where happiness is defined as good luck report feeling less happy than those where luck is not seen as an important part of the definition. Looking at definitions across time in United States dictionaries, the researchers discovered that the definition of happiness included the concept of good luck until 1961. Subjective well-being is the feeling of how satisfied one is with one's life. The nations that score the highest on subjective well-being are Scandinavian and Nordic countries, much of Latin America, various English-speaking countries, and Western Europe. And of course, these guys are from Denmark. That's the red and the white. The Vikings from the red and white country is Denmark. The least subjectively happy people are people of the former Soviet republics and some of the impoverished countries in Africa and South Asia. And this is a picture of the Ukrainian military. This isn't a modern picture. This is an older picture. That's the Ukrainian flag. Flag of Ukraine, of the Ukraine. They did a similar study of the regions in the United States and found that Mountain West and New England had the highest subjective well-being. The area with the lowest subjective well-being was the Southeast, where, of course, racial tensions have been rampant for an extended length of time. Many factors contribute to the overall satisfaction that people have with their lives. One is wealth. People who live in countries in which they have access to enough wealth to easily meet the basic needs of life tend to be considerably more satisfied than those who do not. And of course, the wealth has to do with the red, the rust red color here are the wealthy countries. The Scandinavian countries, that's Iceland, which is part of Norway, I believe. That's England, and this is Germany, France, Switzerland, Austria, Italy, Greece, Japan, New Zealand, Australia. These are the places that where wealth is very common. Looking at the history of subjective well-being, once a country has an average gross domestic product of at least 40% of that of the United States, there's no longer any pronounced relation between money and subjective well-being. And this is according to Diener et al. In 1995. Diener is kind of an interesting word. This is a German name, actually. Diener. Diener means helper. And when I was working in pathology and helping with autopsies, they referred to me as a diener because I was a helper. I just thought I'd mention that. Money can buy a lot of happiness if you're struggling to survive. However, it has much less impact if your basic needs have been met. Those countries that promote human rights the most tend to have the happiest citizens. Those countries in which people live under the constant threat of being thrown in jail for suspicions of plotting against the government are not happy, are not as happy. And okay, the overall equality among people in a country is associated with greater subjective well-being. This is an individual from Ethiopia. The reason they're going like that, they're holding their hands like that, is because they are protesting the arrest of people for human rights, or for trying to increase the human rights in in Ethiopia, and that's one of the reasons why they're holding their hands up. Ethiopia has had tribal problems. People in the north are claiming that they're being treated unfairly, and this is a person from the north of Ethiopia, and that's why this gentleman is holding his hands like that. He's showing a solidarity with the people, with his tribal group in Ethiopia. The Scandinavian and Nordic nations have various social policies to minimize differences and opportunities among its citizens. These nations have some of the happiest citizens in the world. It seems people feel good when their rights are not threatened, and they have opportunities that are comparable to those of their neighbors. And this is a gentleman from Norway. Actually, he looks more Swedish to me, but he's from Norway. The Norwegians tend to have darker hair than people from Sweden. They have blonder hair. People in individualistic societies were far more likely than those in collectivist societies to base their life satisfaction on how many positive emotions they are experiencing. Positive emotions appear to be seen as the basis of a good life in individualistic societies. Oishi in 2002 looked at how Asian American and European Americans interpreted their past. Oishi had people record the week they were having and then asked them to remember the week. While the two groups had similar weeks, the European Americans remembered their week as more positive than it actually was. The Asian Americans remembered their week accurately. Follow-up research by Rogers and colleagues in 2004 found that European Americans appear to be operating under an implicit theory that they should be happy. Asian Americans seem to operate under the theory that emotional experience should be balanced and consist of both positive and negative experiences. Researchers feel that it is quite possible that many of the observed cultural differences in subjective well-being are based on the different theories that people from different cultures have about how they should be feeling about their lives. In a study by Falke et al. In 2010, Canadian students were asked to choose between a video game that was fun and one that boosted thinking skills. The results indicated that European Canadians were more likely to choose the fun game, whereas Asian Canadians were more likely to choose the useful game. In the same study, students were asked to select university courses from a fictitious set of course descriptions. European Canadians were more likely to choose the courses that sounded like fun and interesting compared with the Asian Canadians, who focused more on the perceived utility of the courses. This is really kind of interesting because I had a student once upon a time from Bangladesh, which is an Asian country, of course, right beside India. It used to be part of Pakistan. It's not anymore, of course. It is a separate country of its own. Anyway, I had a student at Ashford who was from Bangladesh. And when he first came to the United States, his first major was in mathematics and in computers. And the reason he did that is because he said it was a more useful topic and one that he could use back in Bangladesh. And then he changed his major from mathematics and computers which he hated. he, he was okay. I mean, he was good at it, and he made straight A's. That wasn't the problem. The problem was he really didn't like mathematics or computers. So he decided to change his major to environmental science, so that he could go back and he could help the people in Bangladesh. But one day he came to me and he said, "I'm miserable. This is terrible. I don't not enjoy the classes, but I want to study psychology. But psychology, this is Bangladesh we're talking about here." And just he was just so sad. He wanted to study psychology because he had taken a class from me and I'd made it sound so much fun that he took another psychology class from me and he had even a better time in the second psychology class. And I told him what you need to do is follow your passion. If you are that interested in psychology, then need to go into psychology. And eventually he did go into psychology. But strangely enough, instead of going into counseling or going into cognitive psychology, he went into industrial organizational psychology. So once again, the more practical aspect of psychology. But he has just finished his PhD. He called me a couple of weeks ago. He just defended his dissertation, and now he has a PhD in industrial organizational psychology, and he's looking for a job. So if you know of anybody looking for an industrial organizational, a PhD with an individual with a PhD in industrial organizational psychology, give him a call. Asian Canadians seem less interested in the idea of doing things for the sake of anticipated positive feelings compared with the European Canadians. Life appears to be less about a pursuit of happiness for people with Asian cultural experiences than it does for Westerners. European Americans report experiencing many positive emotions and less depression. East Asians who report having many positive emotions are no less at risk for depression than those East Asians who report having very few positive emotions. And that's according to Liu et al. In 2011. Positive feelings do not seem to carry the same protection against depression in East Asia as it does for European Americans. Grossman and Cross in 2010 investigated Russian and American personalities through vignettes and discovered that Russians were more likely to identify with the stereotype of the Russian brooder than were Americans. Reflective Americans were more prone to depression, but Russian brooders tended toward less depression. And if you look at this picture, you can tell where these people are from. Now, the odd thing is, who in the world is this guy? And I hope he's standing on something, either that or he's that much taller than everybody else. If you identify these people as Russians, you would be absolutely correct. They are Russians. Brooding over negative emotions, while common in Russia, does not lead to Russians feeling depressed as it does for Americans. It seems to be part of their personality. Brooding is part of their personality. Tsai and colleagues in 2006 proposed the notion of ideal affect, the kinds of feelings that people desire. They are the emotions that people are trying to achieve, so they structure their lives in order to increase the likelihood they will experience these emotions. For most Americans, ideal affect contains positive emotions that are high in arousal, whereas for most East Asians, ideal affect contains positive emotions that are low in arousal. Tsai et al. In 2006 looked at children's storybooks and found that American storybooks showed faces that were excited and had bigger smiles than the storybooks for children in Taiwan. The researchers discovered that European American preschool children preferred pictures of excited faces more than the Taiwanese preschoolers did. And they also felt more similar to the characters who were engaged in high arousal activities. The Taiwanese children felt more similar to the characters engaged in lower arousal activities, such as meditation. Looking at the Gospels of the Bible and Buddhist texts, Miao and Sepla in 2007 found that high arousal states were encouraged more in the Christian texts, whereas lower arousal states were encouraged more in Buddhist texts. Some Christian sects include enthusiastic religious practices, such as jumping, shouting, and applause, and rattlesnake handling. This is a Baptist church where they handle rattlesnakes. Buddhist religious practices emphasize meditation and the calming of one's mind. European Americans are more likely to engage in active individual activities such as jogging and rollerblading, whereas Asian Americans are more likely to pursue more passive activities such as sightseeing and picnicking. And if you've ever been around Japanese or Chinese tourists, you know that they like to take pictures, but they don't want to walk. The bus better be pretty close because they don't want to walk. And when we talk about European Americans are more likely to prefer fast tempo and exciting music, whereas Chinese are more likely to prefer calm music. And this is Quiet Riot, a picture of Quiet Riot, and you can listen to their song Come Feel the Noise. If you click on this, if I did it, they wouldn't allow my my lecture to record because this is copyrighted material. Among Westerners, interpersonally disengaging acts feel especially good. Subjective well-being is associated with positive feelings. People operate under the implicit theory that more positive feelings are better. Positive emotions serve as a bulwark against depression, and high arousal positive emotions are preferred. Among East Asians, interpersonally engaging acts feel especially good. Subjective well-being is associated with appropriate role behaviors. People operate under the implicit theory that it is good to experience both positive and negative feelings. Positive emotions are not associated with less depression, and lower arousal positive emotions are more sought after. And if you click on this X right here, you will hear the top 10 songs from Japan about 3 years ago. And that is the end of the chapter. So we'll talk again next week. We'll tackle chapter 11 next week. This was kind of fun. If you want to hear that music, you can download this and click on these, and since I didn't show them, we should be okay in my lecture. No problems with any copyrights.